Okay, so welcome to the June presentation of the Historical Society of St. Catharines. Tonight's speaker will be starting shortly, but first, just going to give you a rundown on some society business. Dave Willer couldn't make it. He's got another engagement tonight. So I'm John Brenton. I'm the newsletter editor. Memberships are an important part of sustaining the Historical Society, and in 2022, we have 65 paid memberships, which is down just a little bit from the pre-COVID numbers, but overall, a good, healthy number. So thank you for that. Thank you for sustaining the Historical Society. As a member, you receive 4 newsletters annually, and we've already issued 2 since January, and there are 2 more likely this year in August and November. So keep your eye out. This year's been very good. We've had speakers on a wide range of topics. We've done a really good job at seeking out some really different historical type speakers that would appeal to a large, wide audience. The online meetings often bring so many more people than we have in person that we could fit into the museum. So it's great. And, like tonight, we've got people from BC signed into the meeting, which is nice that we could spread Niagara history as far as we can. The other way to see our videos or see our presentations is on the YouTube channel. So check out the Historical Society of St. Catharines YouTube channel. We've got 14 videos there. We already have 48 subscribers. And if you haven't been there, it's quite interesting because we've got all the speakers who have given us presentations in the last year and a bit are up there. Also check out the website, stcatharineshistory.ca. It's another source for those interested in Niagara history. And you can also sign up for a membership right on the homepage. There's a form that's available right on that website. And so in recent news, I just wanted to add, before we get to our speaker, on June 11th, we had a beautiful Saturday morning, and St. Catharines Centennial Gardens Park was renamed Richard Pierpoint Park. So Richard Pierpoint, if you don't know already, Richard was a former Black slave who fought the American Revolutionary War, and as a result, the British granted him 200 acres, a portion of which is occupied by the park itself. So right where Centennial Gardens is, that was part of his land. So it's great that the city could honor him with a park in his name. Walter Sinzik was there, city councilors were there, staff, a lady, Natasha Henry from the Ontario Black History Society was there, and our very own Rochelle Bush of the Salem Chapel BME Church was there, and she cut the ribbon. So it was great. It was a great day, and it was nice to see everybody out there. So with no further delay, I'm going to introduce Gail Benjafield. Gail has been a longtime member of the Historical Society. She's on our board, and she's responsible in many ways for getting the good speakers out that we have. So Gail, it's over to you.
Thank you, John. And my other compatriot in this is Elizabeth Finney, who's been a wonderful help with programming, getting many different speakers for us. And we have a good lineup coming up in the fall. I'm delighted to introduce Hugh Fraser, a man I believe knows more about barns than anyone I can imagine. Hugh was raised on family farms in southwestern Quebec, and he moved to Ontario to take his degrees at Guelph University, which is a natural fit, as it was the former Ontario Agricultural College. He attained an undergraduate degree in agricultural engineering and a master's in engineering. He spent his entire career as an agricultural engineer, I believe, you will correct me if I'm wrong, working with farmers. In semi-retirement, he's become an agricultural consultant and director with the Ontario Barn Preservation. Hugh lives in St. Catharines with his wife Judith, and he has 3 children and 4 grandchildren. And he is already well on his way to his second book about barns. His books are not just about barns, but about the genealogies of the former early owners, the site owners, and the current owners. And it's a fabulous book about people from St. Catharines and Niagara. My favorite thing to find out about Hugh is his license plate, his Ontario license plate. Now, you all know that the Ontario license plate has Ontario at the top, and then your characters and numbers, and then yours to discover. I was amazed to see that Hugh's license plate says Ontario, Old Barns, yours to discover. So let's together discover about old and interesting swing barns from Hugh Fraser. Please welcome him.
Okay, good. Thanks so much, Gail. And thanks, John. So I will just jump right in. And because Gail mentioned that, I actually put my license plate on my presentation. So I think I can share the screen now, John, can I?
Yep, you should be good.
Okay. You should be seeing my screen there then.
Looks good.
You seen it? Okay. So Gail, I put my license plate on there. There's quite a story behind that. I'm not going to get into it today, but it's an interesting story about how I ended up getting that particular one. So hidden in plain sight. And so Niagara's 1800s swing beam barns tell a surprising story. So that's me sitting on a swing beam in near Dunnville, actually right on Highway 3, just as you go into Dunnville. That barn would have been built in the 1830s. So I'm going to, first of all, thank you for tuning in tonight. And I'm going to tell you a bunch of things tonight about my book. And I always talk, before I do any presentation, I always tell everybody how many slides I'm going to be showing. So that way, you know when the darn thing is going to be ended, if it's not interesting, or if you need to go to the bathroom or whatever. So I've got 34 slides I'm going to be showing tonight. And each one of them is going to answer 3 questions, or 3 answers to every question that I get about my book. And one of the first things I always get asked is, why did you write this book? So I've put down 3 good reasons, what I think. And so I've worked with farmers my entire career. So it just seems natural that I would work on something in retirement that had dealt with farmers. That's me on a beam. My brother David, who's on the call tonight, took that picture when he was 19 years old. And it's not a bad picture considering the Kodachrome, whatever camera they took it with. And then at 15, I actually took this photo of Ontario's oldest barn at Black Creek Pioneer Village. I was visiting my sister Jessie, who's also on the call tonight. And so I kind of figured it was my destiny to write a book about barns. 3 reasons that swing beam barns were built. First of all, they were built to store wheat and other grains. That was the main thing. That was the big crop back in the 1800s, even in Niagara. And number 2 was to sell that wheat for hard to find cash. Cash was scarce. And so they just needed wheat just to get some cash so they could buy other goods. And wheat was a staple to help feed your family. And so they really needed to get going right away. And that's why one of the reasons why all the trees came down so quickly. 3 features make swing beams different. Okay, so this is a schematic of a swing beam barn, and you'll see this is the swing beam right here. It always runs across the barn, and it's only supported at its ends. So these are called end posts, and it's only supported at its ends, no other posts anywhere else. It's often tapered, thicker in the center. That's where the most stress is in the beam. And there's other reasons why it's like that. And it's almost always the biggest beam in the barn and almost always 7 feet off the floor. And so that's the way you can recognize a swing beam barn. So 3 reasons it's called a swing beam. There's really no definition out there that says this is why it's called this. But if you look down from the sky at that same barn, they would drive in a wagon with horses into the threshing floor here, and they'd unhitch the horses and swing them around underneath the swing beam and back out through the door that they came in. So that's one theory about why it was called a swing beam. The second one was that you would swing a flail, and a flail was used for beating the tar out of wheat, oats, and barley and other grains to get the seed off of the stalk. And that's actually our aunt is doing that in southwestern Quebec with a flail. That's a huge flail, but that is still a flail. And number three was in some cases, and I've only seen this in a couple of barns, they would actually put a post down from the center of the swing beam, and they would have horses or oxen traipse around in a circle like a merry-go-round around that pole, threshing wheat under their feet. And this little device here as well to pound the living daylights out of it and just thresh off the wheat. So that's three reasons why it's called a swing beam. It does not swing, it doesn't do any of those things, but those are the reasons why. Three groups who built swing beam barns were, first of all, the Mennonite immigrants in the early 1800s who came up from New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And they brought the technology with them, mostly from New Jersey. New Jersey had tons of these barns back in the late 1700s and early 1800s. And then the United Empire Loyalists followed them. They also came up from New Jersey and New York and Pennsylvania. And then there were English immigrants in the 1830s who learned the unique to North America technology when they got here. So there's little nuances of differences between how these barns were built, but they all came from the immigrants, and the technology came from the States. And I would dare say that there might even be more swing beam barns still standing here than there might be in New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. I could be wrong, but it would not surprise me. So three reasons for the big trees that were here in the 1800s that allowed them to build swing beam barns. First of all, the neutral Indians were admired by the Europeans when they came here for their farming prowess in Niagara, but through war, disease, and famine, they disappeared around 1650. And so there were big areas of Niagara that were already farmed. There were no trees on them, not all over the place. It wasn't as clean cut as it is now, but there were certainly areas that were cultivated. Then after 1650, the land in Niagara wilded for 150 years until the Mennonites and the United Empire Loyalists arrived. So for 150 years, the trees were unimpeded. They just grew, and there were huge, huge trees when the first immigrants came up from the States. This 48-inch pine board is at Black Creek Fire near Village. You can see my little notebook down here, which is an 8.5 by 11. And this is 11 inches right here. So this is a big, big board. And there were trees here 3, 4, 5 feet in diameter. Hard to even imagine today. I call discovering a big swing beam like finding a dinosaur bone or a mammoth tusk or a passenger pigeon, because trees like this big will never be seen again. And so if you find one of those things, it's like finding a swing beam. They just don't exist. These things should all be in a museum, in my opinion, because they are just so magnificent. Some of these beams, some of the beams in the barns here in Niagara started growing in the 1600s, which is amazing when you think about it. In fact, one of my stories is about passenger pigeons. There were lots of passenger pigeons around here in the 1800s. The last ones, so they went extinct in about 1914. The skies were black, absolutely black, with millions of passenger pigeons, and there's not one left. Three things happened in the 16 years when a lot of these barns were built between 1825 and 1841, when Ontario went from being Upper Canada to Canada West and then Ontario. So the skies were black with smoke from cutting and burning extra trees. And I just think it's a shame that they didn't leave just a few. Could have left a couple of those 5-footers, but no, they're all gone. And some of the diaries from the past talk about how black the skies were with smoke, because there was just fires going on everywhere, burning brush. Some trees were just burned to get rid of them. Number two, if you climbed a tree on the escarpment up on Victoria Avenue, so you all know where, most of you know where Victoria Avenue is. If you were to climb up there, a tree, you'd probably see 25 barns going up in all directions. There was just hundreds of these things going up so fast that it would make your head spin. I know it. There just had to be. And then the population of Upper Canada tripled from 150K to 450K in those short 16 years. And the siblings on the call here will recognize that this is actually our father right here back when he was in Quebec in school. All these kids are barefoot at school back in the teens, 19s. Three reasons, my theory about why Niagara has so many swing beam barns. First of all, the United Empire Loyalists brought the technology from New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. And that's a Hansberger barn, by the way, Hansberger's wedding barn out in Jordan in this very first picture here, for those of you who know that facility. And then number two, much of the earliest settled areas like the GTA around Toronto are now urbanized, and all those barns are gone. There would have been hundreds, if not thousands of barns in the urban part of the GTA. They're all gone now. There's still some in Markham and north of Toronto, but pretty much in the GTA, there's none left. And then the third reason was fruit farms could use small barns. And their end bay became a holding area, and the threshing floor became a breezeway to pack fruit, and the granary became a cold storage. And this particular swing beam is on a barn, in a barn on 13th Street. It's still there. It's 27 inches deep in the center here, and just a magnificent big pine beam that's 34 feet long. I won't get into all the details about why these the cross section of the majority of the barns look like this, but really there's three different types of cross sections of swing beam barns in Niagara. The oldest ones had the simplest designs and the biggest swing beams, and the next oldest were a little more complicated in their design, but that was because the big trees were disappearing and their swing beams were smaller. And then the youngest barns look more like a truss type of a system. And so you can essentially age a swing beam barn based on the size of its swing beam. Bigger swing beam, older, smaller swing beam, younger. It's almost as simple as that. Three types of swing beams that are out there. There are uniform cross-section ones that are uniform the entire length. And then there's tapered ones, which are bigger at the center than they are at the ends. You can see how this tapers. And this is that culp barn you were talking about up at the quarry that Walker's had. This came out of that barn on Fly Road, just up from Victoria Avenue. And you can see the lines. For those of you who really got keen eyes, you can see lines here and these little marks here. Well, that's where they put joists. This was in a chicken broiler barn. So there were chickens running over this thing for probably 50 years. And it got dyed a little bit browner in some areas than others. And so that's why it looks like that. But that beam is still around. And then there's a third kind of swing beam, which I call a brush cut swing beam. And it's tapered at both ends, but it's flat in the center. And so I've just named it a brush cut swing beam. Everybody on this call knows what a brush cut is. I'm not sure anybody under 40 knows what a brush cut is, but you all know what a brush cut is. Three main types of wood for swing beams. Around here, most of them are softwoods, mostly white pine. That's what I see the most. This is a magnificent swing beam in a barn in Dundas. Just a beautiful, just incredibly beautiful, just the taper of it and a 5% slope on it. It's just magnificent. And then there's there's softwoods, and then there's hardwoods. And just recently, I learned about a black cherry swing beam down near St. Thomas, and you can see these guys are cutting it in half, and it's just a damn shame. But yeah, anyway, they didn't think much of it. But can you imagine having a black cherry swing beam? What that would be worth today. So 3 renovations have made swing beam barns hard to spot. This is a question I get asked all the time. Can you tell from the road? And the answer is no, but with some education and some investigation and you can figure out some things. So first of all, the first thing is that probably half the barns in my book, and there's 50 barns in my book, I'd say half of them, they all started as a gable shape. So this is a gable shape. It's just a simple one like your house. Most people's houses, that's a gable. But very often they were changed to a gambrel shape about 50 years after they were built. And that was to accommodate hay forks and rack lifting wheels and more hay storage. When these barns were originally built, they weren't built for livestock. They were built for wheat. And so when the livestock industry started to take off after Confederation, and people were living in cities, we needed more food for people living in cities. And so we started having livestock and milk, and we needed more storage upstairs. So that's why they were changed. The second one is that ground barns were all built on the ground. Almost all of these swing beam barns were built on the ground, and then they jacked them up later, about 50 years later. So they literally jacked them up and put a foundation and a stable underneath. And then the third way that they're hard to spot is that sometimes they're just buried under a whole bunch of other barns. You just can't even tell it's there. But if with the trained eye and the shape of the barn and the width of the barn, you can figure out some things about what it used to be underneath. So now I'm going to talk about the book itself. So there were 3 big dollar chances I took. First of all, I self-published, even if it meant a smaller audience. I wanted a little more control over my own book. And then I was willing to spend some mega thousands, despite not knowing if I'd sell even 1 copy. And luckily, I've been able to sell enough to break even, more or less. And I wanted to be 100% Canadian, despite costing more. So everything in this book is Canadian 100%. And so that I'm very proud of that. But it does cost more to do it in Canada, but that's okay. I didn't want to send my book to China to get printed, and that's where a lot of them do go. So the 3 things inside my book that you would see if you opened it up. First of all, there's 50 chapters. And so there's 50 barns and there's 50 chapters, one chapter for every barn, 3 or 4 pages on every barn. Almost all of them are in Niagara. There's a couple outside. There's one at Clapperson's Corners, and there's one in Markham. But for the most part, they're in Niagara. And it's the book is 272 pages. It includes 15 pages of glossary, bibliography, and index. And then there's 600 plus figures, schematics, and tables in there. And the book weighs 2 kilograms, 4.5 pounds. And that's because it's a hardcover book, and it has really thick 90-pound glossy pages on it, and a really good binding on it, a stitched binding. So it's going to last longer than any of us on the call here tonight. So it's very heavy, and I've probably mailed close to 200 of these books, and it's very expensive to mail this book. There's 3 parts to each chapter. So the first part of every chapter is an imagined dialogue between the barn owner and others. And it's a foreshadowing story, but based on real history. It's not a real conversation. Of course, I don't know what the conversation was, but it's based on real history. And I've put my owners into a position where they participate and witness history as it unfolds around them. So it's kind of a unique way to tell a story. A lot of people say, I'm just using my book, I'm using barns as an excuse to write stories. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And so that's what I'm doing. And then I talk about the tech details and the photos and the neat things I found inside. And then at the end of every chapter, I talk about what really happened in the future based on the dialogue and the story at the beginning of the chapter. Now, this particular story is about the mystery sickness barn. And it was about a mystery sickness that was killing thousands of people in Ontario back in the 1830s. And guess what we've had here in the last few years? A whole bunch of people dying from a mysterious sickness in Ontario. So it was just fortuitous that I had a story like this. And it was about the cholera epidemic of 1832. So one of the fun stories that I like here is called The Blades, the Dung, and the Stick Barn. And so all of my stories have a kind of a play on words title to them. So this is The Blades, the Dung, and the Stick Barn. So this barn is up on Pelham Road. Some of you might recognize it, probably not. It's up near Rockway. So Jacob Johnson used to be the barn owner, and he visits, I put him into a position where he visits his militia buddies at Chippewa he'd fought with during the rebellion of 1837. And he did fight in the rebellion of 1837. And so he went to visit his buddies in Chippewa, and he finds his buddies playing in the first ice hockey game ever played in the world in 1839. Now, a lot of people think the first game was in Kingston or it was out east, and some people say it was in Montreal, but there's actually a book that has it documented that this game actually happened in 1839. It was some army people who were playing in it, and there's every reason to believe that Jacob Johnson would have known all the people at this thing because he knew those people. So I talk about that, how he happens to play in the first game. And then I describe the barn. And then I explain why he could have probably played in that game. And then just by accident, I met a man in Chippewa who thinks he owns the oldest skates. He thinks these skates came from that game. And he thinks he owns the world's oldest hockey stick. He's had the people from the guy, you probably saw him last night at the hockey game. If you're hockey fans, you probably saw the guy with the white gloves that carries around the Stanley Cup. Well, he had him out to look at this stick. This is a funny looking stick. It's about 44 inches long. And I have to say, it's pretty darn old, and it's carved out of one piece of wood. So I can't verify if that is true or not, but he's convinced he has it. So I made a story around it. 3 other fun stories that I wrote about: the First Falls photo barn in 1840. So my barn owner helps take the first photo ever of Niagara Falls. And this is it. This is the first photo ever taken of Niagara Falls in 1840. And if you're really looking closely, this is the guy who took the photo right here. Now, you say, well, how did he take a photo of himself? Well, back in those days, a daguerreotype camera, you needed an 8-minute exposure. And so you could actually walk into your own picture and be in your own picture. So this is really a selfie of Niagara Falls in 1840. And I had to transcribe this thing because back in those days, the daguerreotype pictures were actually backwards. So he was over on this side of the photo. So, but he took it from the Canadian side. So we had to flip this thing over. So this is the first photo ever of Niagara Falls. And I bought it from a place in England because it was an Englishman who took the photo. Then another story here, the Moon He Ate Her barn. And so there's some family confusion about the visit of the census enumerator. The little kids don't understand what an enumerator is, and they think it has something to do with the moon, and he ate her, and they're not really sure what's going on. So it's kind of a funny story. And then the She Cave barn. 4 daughters of a barn owner tease their brother about their cool refuge in their barn's root cellar. And this root cellar is the most incredible thing I think I've seen in all the visits I've had to barns. This root cellar under the Bank Bridge is on a barn on Martin Road in Vineland, right at the lake. That's the Martin barn. And it's a Roman arch stone root cellar that's 8 feet high, 14 feet wide, and 28 feet long. It's just incredible, the size of that thing. And so I probably the last person that's been in this thing for the last 75 years. That'd be my guess. Then there's some serious stories. The foreshadowed forest barn from 1821. And this is also a true people, Alvin, son of William Foster and his indigenous mother, Ma O'Ray. So those are real people. William Foster was in the United Empire Loyalists. He fought in the War of 1812, and he was married to an indigenous woman. And so Alvin has an argument with his mother, and Ma O'Ray says, Mother Earth's going to turn her back on us in future for cutting all her trees. And Alvin, the son, says, God put the trees there for us to cut. And so they argue about it a bit. And then today she gets the last laugh because the harbors in Lake Ontario silting is partially caused by the lack of tree cover in Niagara here. And you can see from the aerial photos what I'm talking about. Those of you who know the area, this is the Jordan Harbor and the 15-mile creek here, and all the mud that comes out of those places. And so she was right. But back in those days, the settlers thought the trees would never end. They just could not believe that the trees would ever disappear, and they did. Other serious stories, I have one called the Hiding Him Barn. Again, that's a play on words. Barn owner hides a runaway slave from US bounty hunters in 1852. Oh, this should say 1852. I can see a mistake here. That should be 1852. And that's based on some information that I found in the census of 1852. And I won't get into more of it except just to say that's very a plausible story. The Grumbling Stomachs Barn. Children of a barn owner worry they might starve again, like in 1816, after there was widespread famine around the world after a volcano erupted over in the South Pacific, which caused winter around much of the area. And even around here, there was frost and snow in every month of the year, even in July and August. And there was not very much food here for people to eat. And so these little boys are worried they're going to starve. The Rebellion Barn, kids playing in a new swing beam barn near Jordan. That barn still exists. They see smoke across the lake in Toronto and they hear gunshots. And that is William Lyon Mackenzie over on Yonge Street. And I got this information from a book that was published locally here about somebody here. I forget his name, but he actually could hear shots and see smoke over in Toronto when he was working here over in Port Dalhousie. Three great surprises I found in barns. I've seen these in quite a few. These are called marriage marks. And that's the master builder scribing to identify where timbers fit. So there was always a master builder who was just a little smarter than everybody else. And he cut all the wood and he had everything ready to go so that others could fit them together. And this was his little mark that, 1, 2, 3 would fit with the other post or beam that had the same mark on it. And so they call them marriage marks or carpenter marks. This is something I found on a swing beam, not in a swing beam. This is in a granary in a barn on 7th Street. And I call it arithmetic on the granary wall. And it's in dollars and shillings when both were used in 1850. And so there's a conversion rate in here. I had to stare at this for quite a while to figure out what the heck the guy was doing, but there's a conversion rate in there to go from shillings to dollars. And at that time, Canadian dollars were worth the same as American dollars, I believe. And so there was some, so he was doing some calculations. The barn owner's never seen this before. Never, ever seen that before. And then this little neat thing here is a working model of a wagon rack lifter. Now, some of you will know what a wagon rack lifter is, but they were used to lift a wagon right up off the floor so they could pitch wheat sheaves and later on hay, loose hay, into the hay mow. And so this guy owns one of these things. And down on the bottom here, it says patented 1885. And so the guy who owns this right now, his name is Spies, and that's of Spies Road up in Camden area. And this fellow's great grandfather was the maker of this thing, and he was a carpenter. And I think he walked around at night showing farmers what he could build for them in their barns. And this was just like the brush, the Fuller brush salesman or the Rexall person that went around. Some of you will know what I'm talking about. There used to be traveling salespeople that went around to places. And I believe that's exactly what this guy did. Three symbols I find in many barns. See these quite often. They're a fertility symbol, we believe. They were really into fertility, and you'll see these diamonds in a lot of places. And I won't get into all the specifics about what the fertility means, but it didn't all have to do with plants and animals. And the second one here is rosettes, and this is in a barn up in the Camden area. Now, I've put these circles on here to demonstrate where they are. That's that the color is not there. They're just scratch marks. But these rosettes were there to ward off bad luck and stay away from my granary. You almost always see them around granaries because the wheat and the oats and everything they stored in there was their cash. And that was the most valuable thing. They didn't lock their houses, but they locked their granaries. And so these are all concentric circles called a rosette. And then diamond crosses. You'll see these on a lot of barns. Lots of them are missing now, but they're a combination of religious and fire protection. Firefighters use the Maltese cross in their logo, and it's much the same to do with that. It has to do with fire. It has to do with religion. But you will see these, and you'll see them all across Ontario, and you'll see them right from 1820s to the 1880s. They're not for ventilation, and they're not for letting swallows in. They're definitely there on purpose for a carving. Three barns you would all recognize locally if you're from around here. Happy Rolfs is a swing beam barn, but it was changed from a gable barn to a gambrel roof in the 1850s, or I should say much later than it was built, probably in the 1890s. The QEW Antiques barn between the North Service Road and Lake Ontario, it's likely coming down with the big Prudham's development that's going up, but that's an 1850s barn. And then the former Hernders Winery, which burned to the ground 2 months ago. And so whether that gets rebuilt or not, the insurance company has actually called me to ask me if I could help them figure out what used to be in there, because I'm the only one who's actually ever really looked at it closely. So I don't know where that's all going, but that would be a big job to replace that place. Three of my favorite barns. This one's a beautiful drawing from 1877, drawn by the 17-year-old grandson of the owner. I just so enamored with this, how a 17-year-old could draw this with the paper and the colors that they would have had back in 1877. And even the perspective, I figure he must have climbed, there's a huge pear tree out beside their house. And I figure he must have climbed up there, because I can't imagine that he just figured out what it looked like from up in the air. But that is exactly the barn. In fact, it helped me figure out where some things used to be in the barn because of this drawing. And the owner of the barn now has this framed in his house. And then there's the Bucknell barn, Jim Bucknell. Some of you will know Jim Bucknell in Camden, a beautiful barn. Jim will show you that barn any day of the week. You just have to knock on his door. He's so proud of it. He'll show it to you. And then the Culp barn on Culp Road in Vineland. Just a wonderful barn with its wood patina. This photo view is from a three-dimensional camera, which just sat in one spot and zoomed around the whole place. And so I've taken a snapshot off of that. And we think we're going to do barn tours with 3D cameras. They are so handy. The quality is incredible. And you can show people things, when they're 1,000 miles away. So I see this as a technology that we will be using in the future for sure. 3 non-swing beam barns that everybody asks me about. So this one on Seaburn Road up near Merrittville Highway. You've probably all been by it. It might be the biggest barn I've ever been in. It's just incredibly big. And that is a half hip roof. So a full hip roof is one that would have extended. If this went all the way down to the corner of the barn, this would have been a full hip, but this is a half hip. And gambrel barns, like this is a gambrel shape. A lot of people call this a hip roof, but really that's not a hip barn at all. A hip is when all 4 ways go, all 4 ends all end up at the same place, like this. But this is an incredibly big barn, but it was too young and it wasn't a swing beam barn, so I didn't include it in my book. The Lakeshore Road barn, everybody loves this barn. I don't think I've met anybody in St. Catharines who doesn't know this barn. And I wanted it to be in my book. I wanted it to be a swing beam barn, but it's not. It's too young, but it's still a nice barn. And then the one up at Balls Falls, again, a great barn, although there is one barn up at Balls Falls that is a swing beam barn, and I did include it in my book. 3 reasons why people say they like my book. They like to learn about local history. They liked my photos and schematics, and they like my imagined dialogue and stories. And I've circled this little thing here because this says J. Wismer, 1 thick timber. And that is the swing beam. $4 for the swing beam for that barn in 1867. I just think I love this little list of bill of materials. 3 best compliments I've gotten about the book. One person told me I've decided to fix up my old barn after you showed me what I owned. Number 2, you showed me things I never saw in my barn in 50 years. Never saw it ever in my whole life. I've never seen what you just showed me. And number 3, I was going to rip the barn down, and now I'm not going to rip it down. So that's gratifying to hear people say things like that. People just need to be shown what's in their barn sometimes. 3 things I'm doing now as a result of the book. So after I wrote the book, I joined Ontario Barn Preservation, and now I'm a director with them. And so I'd encourage you to go on our website to lots of blogs, lots of good information about barns. Through the OBP, I'm now involved in creating an online tool for owners to record their barns forever in the virtual world. So we're putting together something that you can go online with your cell phone and or on your laptop or whatever, your computer, and you can describe your barn. How big it is, what things you've got in it. And we give lots of information about how to do it. And we're going to launch this at the Outdoor Farm Show with the Minister of Agriculture in September. And then I'm also seeing some beautiful repurposing of old barns. And so there's a lot of people out there, surprising number of people who are living and working in old barns. And it's really nice to see that. 3 ways I've sold my book. I've sold equal amounts on my driveway through mailing and through presentations. And so that's gratifying. It's nice to be able to sell books, but that's secondary. And then 3 lessons I've learned about writing a book, which I did not know before. First of all, best advice I can give to somebody is pay some people to help you do it. And so I've paid a coach with publishing experience. I was a lady in our church who used to work in the publishing industry. I could not have done this without her expertise. I paid her, but that's okay. She's a smart smart coach. And then I paid experts to edit my book. So I hired professional editors, and then professional designers, and then professional printers. And it's not easy to find a printer in Canada. I can tell you that much. They're very, very hard to find. And then I found out it's the law. You have to send 2 books freebies to the Ottawa archives to keep long after you've been deposited in a box yourself or an urn. And so, so I sent 2 books up to Ottawa some few months ago. As soon as you have an ISBN number, they got you. They got you. They know you have a book. So then you have to do it. 3 features in my next book. I'm going further afield to, and I'm mostly working with pre-1841 barns. I've got them in Woodstock, Dundas, Owen Sound, Caledon, Beaver Valley, Dunnville. I'm finding them all over the place, and they're different when they go in different areas. And I'm showing some of the ingenious things I've found in barns. This barn down in Dunnville with these wooden gears is just incredible. I don't know how they ever did this. It's just amazing that somebody would build something like this, and it still works. And then I want to show the artistic flair of builders of the day, like this neat ladder and some of the neat things that are in some of these barns. It's I just love it. 3 ways to find me if you would want a book, or you know somebody who would like one. You can get me through my email, or you can go on my website and contact me there, or you can call me on my phone. I wasn't sure if I should put my phone number on here because this is going to be on the interweb for the next 100 years. But anyway, there's my phone number. The books are $65. That includes tax. I sign every book personally. I prefer e-transfers, but I'll take cash or checks payable to my business. And if you live in St. Catharines, I'll deliver it right to your door if you live within 10 kilometers of North St. Catharines, which is where I live, up at Lake and Lakeshore. There's that little kit I was showing earlier. And you can see the little box that goes on it. And it's just like a little lunch box that the guy used to carry around. Anyway, I think, oh, yeah, that's it. This is my last slide. Great speaking to people who appreciate looking into the rearview mirror to reflect on local history. And I'll do a little commercial here for Sue Ann Staff. You'll know Sue Ann Staff Winery. She named one of her wines Swing Barn Baco Noir. And when she told me about it, I just had to have a case of it. So I bought a case. It's stupid expensive, but I just had to have it. And so I did have it, and it's darn good. Sue Ann's barn is actually in my book. And so that was kind of fun. So I'll try to answer any questions if you have them. But thanks for your attention. Appreciate it.
So everybody, just remember, you can unmute yourself and ask away.
I'm going to put my hand up.
Yeah, okay. I won't be able to, I might not even know who's got their hand up. So
Okay, it's Gail.
John, yeah, Gail and John, can you just kind of keep an eye on who's got their hands up? Thanks.
I wanted to ask you, because I've been reading the book, about the one near the hospital, which nobody
Yes.
seems to know about. Would you just speak about who? I live in West St. Catharines off
Yeah.
First Street House, and I
Yeah.
drive by it all the time. Had no idea.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that one. So the barn is directly right at the railway station, just south of the tracks at the new hospital. It just happens to be owned by the fellow who was the best man at my wedding. And I didn't know he had an old barn until literally 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I've known him for 45 years, and I did not know he had that. So anyway, that's an old barn hiding under there.
But you would never know.
No, you would never
It looks
know.
very ordinary. It
Yeah.
just looks magnificent.
Yeah, beautiful big swing beam in there. Very simple barn, 1839-ish, I think. Yeah.
Thanks, you. It's been a pleasure to hear you.
Good,
Yeah.
thanks.
So Hugh, we had a question in the chat earlier.
Yeah.
And it was a question about the barn floor. So how did they pick up the wheat from the barn floor after the horses had stamped the seed off the stalk? How did they remove the straw? And that's from Janice Harder.
Okay, so they would have swept up the seeds, of course, and then they would have forked the straw that was left, and they would have kept the straw probably for bedding and maybe even for feeding to animals, but they would have swept it up, and then they would have put it into and they would have maybe done a little bit more winnowing with it, where they would let the air blow through it and get some of the shucks off of the seeds, and then they'd store it in the granary. And one of the things that I've figured out in the granaries, most of the grain bins were around 5 feet by 5 feet by about 5 feet deep. And that just happens to be 125 cubic feet. And 125 cubic feet is exactly 100 bushels. And I think that was on purpose, because most of the people who were working in these places were probably illiterate and probably could not do math. And so they just did it that way, so they always knew how much wheat they had in storage. And a lot of the bins were in multiples that would give them 100 bushels or maybe 125, something like that. Yeah.
Did the grain ever fall through the floor to a floor below?
Yeah, good point. So the floor was extra tight on the threshing floor. So it would have been a tongue and groove floor. It would have been 2 inches thick. And the tongue and groove on the early barns was not like the tongue and groove we know today. Tongue and groove today is grooved on one side with a tongue on the other. But in the early days, the groove was on both sides. And then they would pound a spline down between the 2 boards after they were in place. And so they were very tight. They were very, very tight. And so they did not get leakage down below, especially in the granaries too. The granary floors were really, really tight.
What I meant was intentionally it went through a floor to the floor below.
No, not at all. No, they didn't want it to do that. No.
Okay, I'm unmuted if you want to raise your hand.
I have a question about the detail I learned from when I was in the Robin Hood flour mill in Port Colborne. The fact that you can't mix wheat and oats. Do you want to make a comment about that?
Now that's a good question. I've not heard that before. So what is the reason why you cannot mix wheat with oats?
Well, he commented about the fact that they have huge cement silos where they store grain in that elevator there in Port Colborne that they then grind into flour, the famous Robin Hood flour. And he said, if you happen to get not very much oats mixed into a silo of wheat, it will ruin the whole silo. Now, I've never heard that, and I don't know the reason why, but he told me that if you got some oats mixed with wheat in a silo, it would eventually spoil the silo of wheat.
I wonder if it has to do with the different moisture contents of it and the density of the material. That might have something to do with it.
Yeah, I've never heard an explanation for it, but he's told me that that's a fact.
Wow. Well, good. That's a good tidbit. Good.
We've got a question, a hand raised by John. I think that's John Stevens.
I was wondering why did they build a swing beam barn? What was the advantage to that form of construction?
Well, the swing beam, essentially it was just a way to give them an open concept barn. Okay, it gave them lots of room to work without having to have posts in the way and that kind of thing. There are actually double swing beam barns around where they actually have a swing beam on both sides. So the entire barn is pretty much wide open. But you'd say, well, why did they build it tapered? And why did they make it look so ornate? I think this was the farmer's way of boasting about my barn is a little nicer than your barn. You know, the Mennonite way was not to be boastful, but in the barn you could boast as much as you wanted. And so I think because they had to cut wood off of a tapered one to make it tapered. They had to waste a lot of wood to actually make it look so nice. But I think that they used this as an artistic expression. And there are some barns, I've seen some what they call gunstock posts. And so the posts at either end of the swing beam are not even straight up and down. They're actually flared. They're smaller at the bottom than they are at the swing beam. There's no structural reason for it, but it just looks beautiful. And somebody spent a lot of time cutting that piece of wood up to make it look like that. And so there are some really ornate things in some of these barns. It's shocking.
Great, thanks very much.
You're welcome.
We've got some questions in the chat as well.
Okay.
So Joyce asks, where's the barn in Markham?
The barn in Markham is, now I gotta remember, I can't remember what the exit is off of the 401, but it's north of Markham. And I thought when I first went to this place, it's really close to the city. And so I can't even imagine it's going to be there much longer. But maybe was it Markham Road? What there's another one. There's Markham Road and there's another one. I can't remember the name of it, but I don't think it's Markham Road, but it's the other one.
That Markham Road is Highway 48, right?
Yeah, it's not Markham Road. It's the other exit. You go through town, and it's maybe half a kilometer, maybe 1 kilometer north of the city, and it all of a sudden becomes country. And it's up there, and it was built by a Mennonite. And that thing has got religious symbols on the swing beam. It's got crosses on the swing beam. And I know they were carved on purpose. They're not an accident.
Wow, that's interesting. Another question from Joan Hodson. Joan asks, what kind of construction tools did they use to build the barns, and how did they go about felling the trees?
Yeah, I would love to spend a day with some of these people to see what exactly they did. But they used axes, they used saws, they used adzes, they used beetles, which were big wooden hammers. They used drills. They had ingenious devices to make shingles and to make pins that went in the mortise and tenon joints. And everything was planned ahead. Like it was all planned ahead. When they would put a mortise and tenon joint together. So mortise and tenon is when you have the end of the swing beam, let's say, goes right through the post, okay? And then they'd put a pin in to hold that thing together. Well, the holes were pre-planned, so they were just 1/8 of an inch off center from each other, literally 1/8 of an inch off center. And then they'd put the pin in, and it would draw the whole thing together tight. And so taking one of these mortise and tenon joints apart is very difficult. It's very difficult. You can't just pound the pin back out again. You almost have to drill them out. And so they're hard to take these barns down. I can remember being on the farm at one time. We had just a little barn to take down. And I can remember trying to pull it down with a tractor and loader and chains. And you couldn't do it. You just couldn't do it. It was too strong. And lots of people have found that out too.
Okay. Hugh mentioned you can identify some swing barns by their dimensions. How wide would they be on average? The average length of a swing beam.
So almost, I would say probably 50% of the swing beam barns that I've been involved with have been 30 feet wide. That was a very common width. And that was a common, 30 by 50 was a very, very common dimension. But I've seen everything. I've seen 31 feet, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. And the widest one that I've been in so far is the barn down in Dunville that had those wooden gears. It's also one of the biggest barns I've ever seen. And that barn is 46 feet wide with a clear span swing beam in it.
Wow.
It's just mammoth. It's absolutely mammoth. And it's remarkable to see. But there are lots of 40 footers around. There's a 40 footer up in Fenwick in a barn that I've been in that I'm going to include in my next book. And I was at, if any of you know Brienne Farms in Fenwick, I was there last week. They sell strawberries and fruit. You know where it is, John and Elizabeth?
Yes.
I know the
Anyway,
berries.
you know their bear. I bought a flat of
At the
berries when I
market.
was there.
Yeah, they're great.
And he didn't know he had a swing beam barn, and that's a beautiful old barn too, just beautiful. And so I'm going to include it in my next book. It's there'd be an interesting story on that one for sure.
The other part of that question as well was, are there any swing beams that we can see close up in a museum or somewhere?
Well, maybe someday. Some of you will know the High Barn that was in Jordan on Highway 8, right at Jordan, just before you go down into the hollow. And the locals will know what I'm talking about when you go down the hollow, down towards Butterball Restaurant. There used to be a barn there. It was owned by the Highs, and it was built in the 1830s. And it was taken down by the town to be resurrected at the Jordan Museum, the new Jordan Museum. But they don't have enough room for it. So it's sitting in storage. And hopefully someday they'll get it up and do that. But if you want to see a swing beam, go and see Jim Bucknell in Camden. Jim's the greatest guy you'll ever meet. And he'll show you his barn. He's just as you go into Camden. I was in there for a couple of Saturdays ago. They had a house tour of old houses around the area there, but we included the barn, and I sat in there for 8 hours with showing people that barn, and he would show it to you. There's one at Shank Farms as well, but it's not exactly a tourism place, you know. It's a working farm. But go into the antiques store there at QEW, at the QEW at Prudham's. You can look there. They'll look at you as if you got 3 heads, because they'll wonder what you're looking at, because they did when I went in there. Everybody thought I was nuts when I was measuring things and taking pictures, because there's all vendors in there, right? But yeah, you can see one there.
And as you say, that may not be there for much longer.
Well, I think it might get moved. I'm optimistic that it will get dismantled and moved somewhere for a business or something like that. But eventually you'll be able to see the one on Culp Road, because that's going to be turned into an agritourism sort of a place in the future. So you hopefully will be able to see that one.
I have another question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Bill has a question first.
Oh, Bill had a comment, so that's pretty cool. And he was talking about the old Stokes seed barn that's on Martindale. That was on Martindale. It was moved and reassembled in the Farwell Road area in DeQ. Is that a swing beam barn?
You know, I bet it was. And I've heard about that being moved, but I've never been able to find somebody that could tell me where it got moved to and who owns it. But I understand it's in a house or something. Is that right?
Bill might know. If anybody knows.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it.
It's
You can
just
probably
south
request
of the
it.
St. Catharines Reservoir
Okay.
on a, what's now a dead-end street, Fowle Road.
And is it in a house? Is it in a house?
No, it's a barn.
Oh,
I don't think there's a house on the property. The property at one time was owned by the Gray Gables School or something like that.
okay.
That folded. And I don't know who owns it. I used to walk around and do birding in there, but they don't want you walking around anymore. So I haven't been in there in years.
I would love to see it. I can tell instantly if it is a swing beam or not, instantly.
Okay, get your hand
I
up.
have a question.
Yep.
I have a question for my brother. Is anybody living in a barn, in one of those barns?
Oh, yes, yes. There are some beauties out there. So one of the directors of Ontario Barn Preservation, she's an architect, and she lives and works in a not a swing beam barn, just a barn. And I know other people that work in barns. There's a local guy here in St. Catharines who takes barns down, and he will reassemble them for people who are thinking about working or living in barns.
Good.
I've been in a beautiful swing beam barn house before, but not everybody wants you to come in and see their house, right? It's kind of it's a tricky thing, you know. They're very personal things, but yes, there are lots of people, and the best swing beams have already disappeared from the province. There were swing beams, lots of them out there that were 36 inches deep, 40 inches deep. And they all left the province. They went down to Texas and Florida and all these places. The Americans knew what they were looking for, and they would pay big bucks. You know, some of these swing beams would go down to the States for thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so there are people living in them for sure, for sure.
They must be beautiful inside.
Oh, some of them are just magnificent. And I've seen a couple that I can tell that they didn't put it back the way it used to be, but I daresn't say anything because they don't realize it wasn't put back the way it was built. There's a wedding barn up in Huron County that I was in, and they flipped the swing beam upside down. I know they did, but I didn't tell the guy.
Bob Halfyard has his hand up, but he's muted.
Yeah, I want to thank you. You brought back so many memories for me because I spent my teen years at my uncle's farm. And I'm going to send you a couple of pictures of the barn that my great grandfather built, which unfortunately is no longer there. But I've been saying for a long time that our grandchildren are never going to see barns.
Yep.
And so I'm thankful that you're doing something to maybe forestall some of that. If you drive down the highway, every now and again you see a barn it's near the end of its life, and it's sad, but it's the end of a way of life.
Well,
So,
the good news is
interesting.
The good news, Bob, is that when we get this information into the database, there's going to be really smart software available that will be able to recreate these barns in the real, in the virtual world, right? So you'll end up getting something that kind of looks like this, okay? So that is a 3D model printed on a 3D printer, all of plastic, but once you have some of the dimensions and you know the basics of how a barn is put together, you can actually recreate that thing. And you'll be able to see that old barn that's been down that you remember working in. You put a couple of smart people together and they can recreate that barn. I guarantee it.
Unfortunately, I remember what it looked like. I remember being in it, but unfortunately never thought to take a picture of inside it. And I regret that now, but who, you don't know.
Well, you can almost figure out what's inside. So some of our directors, we will play games on the Ontario Barn Preservation. Somebody will send a picture around to everybody and they'll say, where do you think this barn was built? Or what can you tell me about this barn? And it's amazing what you can tell from a picture, what that barn was
Now, if I
used for.
send you pictures of the barn, then I should send you the exact location
Yeah.
and when I think it was built, for example.
Is it a local barn?
No, Durham County. Actually, a mile northeast of Moseport as the crow flies.
Okay, well, you can look at, there's aerial photos around, even around Niagara, there's 1934 photos. And I use those things all the time for my barn work and for my consulting work. Because
Well,
you
I
can
have
tell-
an aerial photo of the farm.
Yeah. Yeah, well, those are helpful too. So so in my next book, I'm planning on putting our barn from Quebec in the book.
Okay.
And I'm recreating it based
Well,
on
as
what
I-
I remember and talking to others who were in the barn. So you can figure things out. We've figured it out right to the last, pretty much the last foot, how wide it was, how long it was, how it was constructed, where everything was. You can do it. You can do it.
I won't. Okay, well, I've noted your email address, and so you'll be getting some stuff from me.
Okay, good. Thanks,
Your hand
Bob.
up, Sean.
John,
Hugh,
John
I
Finney?
have a question. Way back, you were showing your book, and near the end, you were talking about how some barn owners don't even know what they had.
Yeah.
And you showed one picture, and there's sort of vertical things. I don't know, what were those things? You said
Oh, the was that a picture of a post?
it was a bunch of vertical things. I don't know what they were.
Oh, I remember exactly what that was. Okay, so that was, I'm going to share my screen here again. I can tell you exactly what that was. That was a feeder in a barn, and that was a feeder for horses. John, can I share my screen again?
Yes, you can.
I know exactly which picture you were talking about. This one?
Yeah, I think so.
So
Wait, I've
that's
got
it.
That's it, yeah.
So that's a hay feeder. So there would have been hay in front of this thing, and the horses were eating there, and they like chewing. And so they were chewing the spindles
Oh, I see.
on here. Those are probably oak, but it doesn't matter. They would chew them and play with them. And that's where their snout was on their
Oh, I
nose.
see.
There's
Oh.
no doubt. There's no doubt about it. That's exactly what it was.
No doubt was their snout.
It was up high enough in the barn on the feeder that it had to be horses.
Ah, okay, thank you. That's cute.
Yeah, that's exactly what that was. Yeah. Good for you to ask that question.
There's your tapered log for you right there, eh?
What?
Yeah, that's right.
So Bill Stevens, I guess, confirmed what John Stevens had said. He said, Hugh, the former Stoke Seed barn is on the west side of Falwell Road. Turn
Yes.
south off of DeQ Road and go across the bridge and over the top of the hill, look to your right.
Okay, west of Falwell. Okay, I'm gonna have to take a look at that. Can I see it from the road? Can I see it from the road?
Apparently, yeah. Over the top of the hill, look to your right. You'll see the barn.
Okay, good. That's great. I will.
So okay, and then there's a couple of thank yous. Thanks, very good presentations from G. Hodge from Norwood, Ontario.
Hmm.
Really?
Norwood. Holy
Norwood.
mackerel. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And Bell says, thanks, Hugh. Terrific info. We'll head to the antique barn for sure.
Okay. Good. Great.
So does anybody have any more questions for Hugh? Going once. We can, and so also Hugh has shared his email address, so you can always email him with your questions when you're there to buy a book. And so Hugh, I would like to thank you very much for your presentation. This has been a very interesting one. It's one that I really like because I like old barns too. And like Bob said, you know, it's really sad to see a barn in disrepair, and you see it every time you see it. You know, the next thing, the roof is caved in, and then it's just a pile of boards, and it's really sad to see that. When, you know, it served such a purpose over the years, and it was built by you know, people like your great grandfather. You know, has built this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and just in parting words for everybody, we are now taking a 2-month break for the Historical Society. We'll see everybody back in September. There will be interesting presentations coming up. Like I said, everybody's been working hard to get these presentations lined up, and we'll be posting the information on those upcoming presentations in the August newsletter. And at the same time, you can see it on the website, and that's stcatherineshistory.ca is our website. And just one more thing I would like to add, and if you are interested in seeing an old barn, and this is for you as well, Hugh, that the Marshville Heritage Festival. So if you've not been to Wainfleet, it's in the September long weekend, September 3rd, 4th, and 5th. The Marshville Heritage Festival site has got a beautiful old barn. I believe it's the Schultz barn. And you'll have to just pop in there and see if it's a swing beam. But the great thing about that, if you're a history lover, the Marshville Heritage Festival has got something for everybody. They've got demonstrations. They've got people in the costume of the era. They've got people spinning wool, the wool that they've taken from their own sheep, that type of thing. So it's a great sort of a working museum, and it's all run by volunteers down in Marshville. Great place to spend a day with the family. So there's your thought for how to spend your time on the September long weekend in 2022. So I'd like to thank everybody for being on this presentation. Again, Hugh, terrific presentation. Everybody stay safe and have a great summer. We'll see you in September.
Okay, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.